Terrorists attack Boston, and the Curry community reacts.
From students at the finish line to faculty living inside the Watertown neighborhoods, we have every angle covered.
This is a special edition of Curry Primetime Report.
And it begins right now. Welcome to CPT. I'm Matt Fitzgerald.
And I'm Bottary. Let's get right to the headlines making news this semester. Shock, sadness, disbelief after the 2013 Boston Marathon was attacked by terrorists. Since the attack, countless stories have emerged right from people right here on our own campus. First, CPT's Peter Maxwell, who was on the scene of Boston that fateful Monday afternoon, recaps the first couple of hours.
Marathon Day. Patriots Day is supposed to be a great day every day in Boston. 27,000 runners from 96 countries signed up for the 26.2-mile race. A place of celebration instantly transformed into a scene of chaos. The race famous for Heartbreak Hill, now the site of just heartbreak. Not all the initial reports turned out to be true, but the initial fears did. Now there was a race of a different kind. To rescue people and to save them. Hundreds more were injured, 3 are dead, and many are still in critical condition. Among the dead, a Boston University graduate student, Lindsay Liu, an 8-year-old boy, Martin Richard from Dorchester, and 29-year-old Crystal Campbell.
Peter Maxwell will be with us in the studio in just a few moments with more on the dramatic capture of bombing suspect number 2 in Watertown. Peter was also on the scene in Watertown as those events unfolded.
As the bombs went off, numerous Curry students were at the finish line and witnessed the horror firsthand. Curry Health Major Brian Gray, an off-duty EMT, was one of those on the scene, and he headed directly towards the bombs to help victims. I talked with him earlier to hear his unbelievable story. Brian, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First off, just tell me what you saw, where were you, who you were with, your initial thoughts when the bombs first exploded.
I was with my friend Joe, Steve, and my girlfriend Stephanie. We were about what seems to be about a half a block from where the first bomb occurred. I was exiting a restaurant to where we were eating outside on the patio. At that time I heard a large bang. And then I continued outside and looked to my right, and I saw a very large cloud of white smoke. At that point, I gave a kiss to my girlfriend and started running towards what unknowingly was a bomb. As soon as I got there, I could smell in the air that it wasn't a gas leak, it wasn't steam or anything like that, and I kind of identified it with myself as that this is possibly an attack. And then I looked to the ground and saw multiple people on the ground with severe injuries, quite a bit of blood on the sidewalk. And it's kind of at that point I really knew that this wasn't an accident. In my back of my mind, I guess you could think that I thought there was a bomb, but I immediately asked an officer if I could do anything to help, and I just started helping people out. By putting tourniquets on them and their injuries.
Now, what were the type of injuries that you saw? What were the most severe injuries that you saw out there?
The most severe was complete amputations or bilateral amputations, meaning both legs. Injuries would range from some lacerations to the legs to, again, complete amputations. There was just numerous injuries to a lot of people.
How many people would you say you treated yourself?
I would say quite a bit. The number is a little foggy. I was just kind of in a race to help as many people as possible and do my best efforts.
Now, how long were you there at the scene, and what kind of happened? Take me through kind of what happened after you were treating people. Where did you do? Where did you go? Things like that.
Well, after I was done treating everybody, I did transport with an ambulance company to the hospital, and then I returned to an ambulance staging area that was set up. I did stage with that ambulance company for a little while, and then met up with my supervisors for a medical response that I work with out of Brockton, and stayed with them till probably about 8 o'clock at night before I left the city.
Now, you said you've been an EMT for 6 years when we were talking before the interview. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Nothing of this caliber. You know, if there was an injury to somebody, it was only one person. It wasn't what we call a mass casualty.
Now, when did it finally sink into you, like, man, this actually happened? When did you finally realize what was actually happening and take it all in?
I think I really realized what was happening was right in the middle of it. I was, you know, putting my belt on a leg and using it as a tourniquet, and I really, you know, understood that this is happening now, and I had a job to do, and that was to help that many people. I don't think there was a time after, while staging with everybody, that I realized it more than I was at that scene.
Now, have you had any contact with anybody that you treated? Do you know how they're doing, anything like that?
I haven't made any contact with anybody, other than just listening through the news. There were a couple of people that I did treat at the site that I did see on the news that they were doing well and recovering.
Now, would you return to the marathon next year when it happens?
Absolutely. I absolutely would return.
Anything you want to add or say to the people?
Just that my prayers are out there for the families and the people that are injured out there, and just hang in there and stay strong.
All right, Brian Gray. Brian, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Brian tells me his clothes were so soaked with blood that he literally had to buy new clothes later that day.
5 days later, the week-long drama came to a shocking end as Boston and its suburbs were literally closed for the day. A suspect bomber was on the loose, and no one knew exactly where he was. To pick up that story, CPT's Peter Maxwell joins us in studio. Peter, you were actually in Watertown as all this unfolded.
Anna, that's right. I was working for NBC News when the shots were fired that ended with the capture of suspect number 2, Jahar Zarnaev, found in the now infamous boat. But to get to that moment, it was a day of trauma and a police presence like the Boston area has never seen before. As Black Hawk helicopters swarmed over the skies of Watertown, Boston was on lockdown as thousands of police and federal officers converged on a 20-block neighborhood near the Arsenal Mall. Media from all over the world watched from the streets. As the manhunt continued, the evidence from the early morning firefight was being taken away on flatbeds. The green Honda Civic that was used by the suspect to evade police was taken away first, followed by Transit Officer Richard Donahue's cruiser, who was injured in the firefight, was escorted away from the crime scene. As the cleanup continued, a Watertown police SUV that drove towards the suspects during the early morning firefight was taken away after it was severely damaged and rolled out of control. Then, at 6:59 p.m., the unthinkable happened. You can see right now multiple law enforcement agencies are en route to the distance. The gunshots, they're just a barrage of bullets, just gunshots just going off. It was honestly one of the most scariest things in my life, and I'm shaking really a lot right now. As the news spread that Zarnaev was captured, the streets erupted into applause and people thanked the police for their efforts. It was something I will never forget. Anna, Matt?
Peter, thanks. That's an incredible story.
And Anna, even more stories are coming out of those Watertown neighborhoods from Curry faculty and alums of the college. English professor Alan Hunter lives off one of those major streets in Watertown that was part of the police search zone looking for the bomber. Here's Professor Alan Hunter's story in his own words.
It's a very safe, it's a quiet town. So it was a little surprising when things unfolded early on Friday morning. And I saw waves of police cars going by with their blue lights. 3 waves. There must have been, I thought at first there were 30, but actually there were probably only 20. And then I heard the explosion and the cars came back because they'd overshot. And then the machine gun, or gunfire, it was automatic pistol. And suddenly the police were basically sealing off my street. Within a very short amount of time, there were more police than I've ever seen in my entire life, and that would continue for the rest of the time. There's several bursts of gunfire, and then basically the yellow tape went up, and we were told to stay where we were. And at a certain point, a man came, knocked on the door, and said, "Can we come into your house? We've had a tip that the house diagonally over the back fence it has a hostage situation." So we had a SWAT team member up in the back bedroom and these heavily armed gentlemen all over the back garden on the back deck. Turned out to be a false alarm, but there were 2 Humvees on one side of the house with their turrets trained and 2 others on the other side of the house, and maybe 50 police that I could see. And then we got the order, or the release notice, and my neighbours had actually evacuated. They had little children. So people started to walk their dogs, and I thought, this doesn't feel right. And I'm on the phone to my friend from Concord saying, well, this is what happened to me, and suddenly there are these shots. And I said, did you hear that? He said, yeah, I heard that. How many do you reckon? Well, it was about 50 of those. Turns out it was the younger suspect who was hiding in the boat. He looked under the flap, saw that there was this figure, and immediately called the emergency services, who had only literally just stood down. They were there in seconds. We have several people we know on that street. I talked to those neighbours, and they told me what they'd seen through their windows, through peeping round blinds, and they needed to talk, and I needed to listen. But my quiet, quirky, loving, friendly neighbourhood has been shaken. We're stronger, but we've still been shaken. And in some ways, we mourn that too.
Professor Hunter says he hopes the neighborhood can now return to normal.
Also hoping for a return to normalcy is Curry's alum and Nesson studio technician, Steve Tagarelis. Steve lives in the Watertown neighborhood where the shootout occurred, and he says he won't soon forget what had happened.
So we didn't quite know, if there was more than one person on the loose and exactly, what direction they headed towards. All I knew is there's helicopters flying above and cop cars everywhere, and SWAT teams everywhere, and you knew it was something big. So we had all day, the next day, we had cops waiting at the top of our street and at the bottom of our street. And they definitely had quarantined a perimeter area. I'm not quite sure whether or not my house was in it. My sister, who lives a few streets away from me, and it's actually a little bit further away from the center of where everything happened, her house was actually searched. And it was eerily quiet all day the next day until they lifted that ban. And all of a sudden, we had the police scanner on all day. All of a sudden, the police scanner started hopping with, misidentifications as soon as people left their houses. Everything just started like buzzing again. All of a sudden, there's 2 helicopters flying around. As soon as they called for Franklin Street, there were a lot of cop cars heading down Mount Auburn Street all of a sudden. And then I did hear the gunshots from that initial, when they found him. I'm still not quite sure whether it was the cops who shot first or whether he shot first from the boat, but I did hear those gunshots, and as soon as I heard those, I went back inside my house. I wasn't staying outside. I wasn't about to celebrate. I wasn't happy that they got them, because it was, it was a tragedy and it was a tough situation. There was definitely a sense of relief that came over me, and there was definitely a sense of thankfulness with just the way everything came together, and it being so close to me, it really hit home, and there was definitely a lot of thankfulness and relief once they had caught him.
As Boston and the region slowly return to normal this week, we also have to pause to remember the victims. More than 200 injured and 4 dead.
8-year-old Martin Richard, 29-year-old Crystal Campbell, and 23-year-old Lou Ling.
And MIT police officer 26-year-old Sean Collier. At a memorial service at MIT, more than 10,000 law enforcement officers from around the world came to remember one of their own, who was cut down trying to protect all of us.
We'll be right back.